Pretty much everyone has seen Pet Sematary, but if you haven't, and you have kids, you might want to pass on it. If you've seen it, then you know why. The whole movie evolves around death, and the idea that
sometimes death is better.
If you didn't know, the original novel was written by Stephen King, and he was pretty involved in the movie too. It spawned a sequel and a remake in 2019. So is the original worth a watch or even a rewatch? Let's find out. The opening credits show the Pet Sematary with some chilling music, a good way to set the mood. Then we meet the Creed family, Louis, Rachel, Ellie, and their young son Gage. Louis is a doctor and he's found work in this small town, where he sets up his practice. As they're getting settled in, Ellie goes to play on a tire swing, and lo and behold, it breaks. Her parents come rushing over to calm her down, and they leave Gage alone, unattended, to wander into a busy road. A truck is barreling down the path, and Gage is about to get hit when Herman Munster saves him.
Not in that road.
Gage!
This is Judd Crandall, played by Fred Gwynne.
Well, watch out that road.
This is probably his most well-known movie, but I'll always know him as Herman. Here, he's the family's neighbor, and for me, he's the highlight of the movie. I just love his voice. It's so eerie, but welcoming at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good story. A good walk. I'll take you up there sometime. Tell you the story, too.
The next day, Crandall takes them all to the Pet Sematary that's behind their house.
It says Pet Sematary, honey. It's misspelled, but that's what it says.
You would think, because this is the name of the movie, that it's an evil place. But it's not. According to Crandall, it's not scary, but a place of rest. And that seems to be true. Nothing mysterious or bad happens here. It's what's beyond the tombstones they need to worry about. Louis goes to work, and his first patient got hit by a truck and isn't going to make it. This is Victor Pascal, and because the doctor tried to help him, he comes back to try to help the doctor. He acts as a sort of supernatural guide throughout the story, the good angel on the family's shoulder. So who's the devil on their shoulder? Well, believe it or not, it's Crandall, but it's not his fault. He's only trying to help. You see, while the rest of the family are off visiting Rachel's parents, the family's cat, Church, gets run over.
I'm sorry.
Crandall doesn't think that Ellie is ready to learn about death yet, so he does the unthinkable. He takes Louis beyond the cemetery. They hike pretty far through the woods and over rocky cliffs. They hear something big in the woods, and Crandall says it was probably just a loon. You would never guess what it really is, and it was cut from the film, but it was actually the Native American monster, the Wendigo. And that kind of fits, because they take Church to an Indian burial ground, and they bury him there. Louis doesn't know at this point what he's doing, but he'll find out soon enough. He rakes leaves for about 5 seconds, then needs to take a break. In the garage, he's surprised to see Church. But something's different this time. He's much more aggressive. He goes over to talk to his neighbor and to learn about what exactly they did last night. Crandall tells him that when he was a kid, he buried his dog Spot in the burial ground. But when it came back, it was different. Out of curiosity, Louis asks if they've ever buried a human up there. Surprised, Crandall says, "No, why would you even think of doing such a thing?" The family comes back home and everything is fine for a little bit. Ellie doesn't know that her pet is actually a zombie cat. The only thing she says is that it smells really bad. I guess while they were away, Ellie had a dream about church, that he died. The family also had some hired help, and she killed herself, so the subject of death has been coming up a lot lately, and Ellie is curious. She asks her dad about heaven and how it all works, and Rachel overhears them talking. She gets super disturbed, and later we learn why. It turns out when she was younger, she had a sister that was really sick. She would have to feed her and take care of her, and she hated to do it, which eventually evolved into her hating her sister. One day, her parents went out and left her there alone, and that's when her sister died. She was worried that everyone would think she killed her, but in the end, she was relieved in her passing, happy even. So, needless to say, Rachel probably needs some professional help. That sort of thing can traumatize a kid, and her parents don't really seem like they care that much. They knew their daughter could die at any minute, and they still went out, leaving Rachel to deal with it. This is why Lewis didn't go with them to visit her parents before. He really doesn't like them for what they did to his wife back then. The next day, they're all having a picnic, and everyone's having a great time, and life is perfect. Lewis is showing his son how to fly a kite, and Ellie wants in on the action. Gage drops the string, and it starts flying into the road, where a truck is coming at full speed. Judd sees what's going to happen, and he yells out. Lewis is running, but he's too late. There's nothing he can do, and the truck hits Gage. It's heartbreaking, and made even worse when Rachel's father yells at Lewis and blames everything on him. At his own son's funeral, he punches him, and a fight breaks out. During the struggle, the tiny coffin falls over, and Lewis gets a brief glimpse of his son. That's enough to make anyone desperate enough to do whatever they have to do to bring their child back. That night, things are pretty somber at the Creed household. Judd stops by because he knows what Lewis is thinking. He wants to bring back his son. Judd warns him against it and comes clean about a lie he told him earlier. They did once bury a human in the burial ground, but the results were disastrous. A man died at war, and his father brought him back, but he wasn't the same. Yeah, you think? He's eating people. The town started to see the guy walking around and were all afraid, so a mob was formed to take care of it. Crandall was in the mob when they burned down the guy's house. His grieving father's still in it. He warns Lewis not to bury Gage up there.
Sometimes that is better.
I guess all of this is too much to handle for the family, and they decide to move back to Chicago with Rachel's parents. But Lewis needs to stay behind and wrap a few things up. That being bringing his son back to life. He goes to the graveyard and starts digging him up. Pascal is there and he tries to stop him, but the grieving father will do anything to see him again.
The ground is sour.
Over in Chicago, Ellie has a dream about Gage, her father, and a guy named Pascal. Rachel knows that name sounds familiar, and then remembers it was one of her husband's patients. I guess that's enough to trigger her to head back home.
Pascal? Where do I know that name? Pascal?
Rachel is stopped several times by bad luck, or maybe something more evil, but Pascal is always there to help. She's running late for a flight, he holds the door. There's no rental car, so he telepathically reminds the worker that they might have one left for her. It seems like Rachel is Lewis's last hope, and Pascal knows it. But they're too late. Gage is buried, and all Lewis has to do is wait for his son to come back. And he does. The first thing he does is grab his father's scalpel. Then, over to the neighbor's house. Crandall knows what happened. He can just sense Gage's presence. He tried to find the boy to kill him himself,
I brought you something.
but Gage gets him first, nearly cutting his foot off. Seriously strong for a 3-year-old, and then taking a bite out of his throat. Rachel finally shows up. She starts to head home, but then hears someone calling out from her within Crendell's house. She goes in to check it out, and upstairs, for a brief moment, she sees her sister. But then, it turns out to be Gage. I don't really know which is worse.
I brought you something, Mommy.
Lewis wakes up and sees tiny footprints, so he knows it worked.
Gage.
He also notices that his scalpel's missing, so it didn't work. He gets a couple syringes and gets ready to clean up his mess. He starts with the cat and throws a whole steak on the ground. What a waste! That's like $15. Anyway, the injection does work, and the cat is really dead now. He wanders inside, and upstairs he finds the body of his neighbor. And eventually his wife. Gage attacks his father, stabbing him several times, but eventually Lewis gets the upper hand. He injects his son, killing him for good. A pretty heartbreaking scene, to be honest. Lewis sets the house on fire and leaves with Rachel's body. And he's not thinking of doing it again, is he? Pascal warns him not to go back, but he thinks because Rachel just died, it'll work this time.
Because she just died. She just died a little while ago.
It doesn't. In fact, she looks worse than Gage did. They make out because, the first thing I want to do is make out with a rotting corpse. Then, Rachel grabs a knife. According to King, Pet Sematary is the only novel he's written that really scared him. That's understandable, because a lot of it was based off of his real-life experiences. His daughter's pet cat was killed on a highway, his son nearly ran into a road with a speeding truck driving by, and he had an elderly neighbor that lived across the road from him. It all goes to show that when you make a work of fiction, it's best to sprinkle in some truth here and there. When you do, it'll make it a lot more relatable to your audience. I have a 3-year-old. I know how hard it is to keep your eyes on him 24/7, but you have to. And after watching this movie, I think I'll be investing in a toddler leash. Pet Sematary is pretty good. It's not your standard zombie movie. Instead of horror, it ends up being more sad than anything else. When it opens, Lewis is calm and pretty level-headed. By the end, he gets crazy and desperate. Anyone would. The standout character here is Judd Crandall. Like I said, there's something about his voice that just works for this movie. I'd recommend Pet Sematary, and even if you've seen it before, give it another watch. It holds up. It's not perfect. It's a little slow at the beginning, and it's very predictable, but a good movie overall. I give Pet Sematary 3.5 Herman Munsters out of 4.
And now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and comfort you and lift you up and give you peace. Amen.